Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of With the British Army in the Holy Land, by H. O. Locke. Chapter 14, The Wadi Dar Ballad.
In the last chapter, we saw how, after the capture of Jerusalem, the 20th Corps proceeded to improve the line on the right. We will now follow the operations of the 21st Corps on the left. The first operation of importance was that carried out by the 52nd Division on the extreme left. On the night of the 20th to 21st December 1917, crossings, partly by fording and partly by rafts, were effected over the Wadi Arja, a few miles to the north of Jaffa. The high ground overlooking the wadi from the north was rushed before dawn, and a line was consolidated which effectually deprived the enemy of all observation from the north over the valley of the Wadi Oja. Incidentally, the distance between the enemy and Jaffa was increased from 3 to 8 miles. This safeguarded Jaffa and its harbour and the main Jaffa-Jerusalem road. Further adjustments of the line were made, including the capture of Ranti on the railway and El Teen and Bornat to the right, which gave commanding views over the forward country and increased elbow room to the troops covering Lud and Ramla. As the result of these operations, the line ran, at the beginning of March, approximately as follows. The 60th Division on the right had reached the Jordan, our line running along that river as far north as the Wadi Oja and then bending westwards. On their left came the 53rd Division, a little to the north of Beira, and on their left again the 10th Division completed the front of the 20th Corps. They joined up the 75th Division, whose frontage ran from Midian, the Modin of the Maccabees, through Kibia to the foothills at Et Tyra. From here, the 54th Division extended across the plain, while the 52nd Division held the sector close to the sea, a little to the north of the other Wadi Oja. Except for occasional rains, our soldiering in the 75th Division sector, throughout February and the early part of March, was campaigning de luxe. The enemy had gone right back to the line of the Wadi Dar Balut, leaving a no-man's land in front of us about 4 miles across. He held advanced posts a mile or two in front of our line, but his guns had been taken well back out of range. We therefore enjoyed immunity both from sniping and shelling, and could move about in front of our line without anxiety, even in broad daylight. The observation posts that we occupied commanded extensive views across no man's land, and we should have had early intimation had there been any considerable hostile movement. We thus had opportunities for training and preparing ourselves for the next forward push. The whole battalion was put through a course of musketry. The forward slopes of our position provided an admirable field firing range, with all no man's land for the stray bullets to spend themselves upon. How it must have made the Turk itch to see men lying about in platoons in the open before his very eyes, and how he must have longed to have had a gun within range, and to have dispersed us with a few rounds of shrapnel. We also instituted a very successful shooting gallery. In the front line, beer was seldom procurable, though much appreciated. Such as we were able to obtain from the canteen was taken to the rifle range. An empty bottle was set up 200 yards in front of the firer, and a full one behind him. If he hit the former, he became entitled to the contents of the latter. Each man was entitled to 1 free shot, and as many more as he liked, at a cost of a penny each. The result was that, at a very nominal cost to the canteen funds, the individual shooting of the battalion considerably improved. Aerial activity was interesting. We soon became accustomed to the distinctive hum of the Hun machines flying high above us, followed by the barking of our Archies. Then we could trace the track of the planes across the sky by the line of white smoke puffs left by our bursting Archie shells. Archie seldom reckons to get a direct hit on a plane, but, by the expenditure of quantities of ammunition, he makes the Hun fly too high to see anything of value or to drop bombs with much hope of success. More tangible results were obtained by our fighting planes, which engaged the Hun in the air. A pretty little fight took place 1,000 feet or so above our heads, between 2 of our planes and a couple of Huns. After preliminary circling and manoeuvring for place, during which one Hun machine discreetly went all out for home, one of our planes swooped straight on to the remaining Hun, pouring a burst of Lewis gunfire into the pilot and observer at short range. Badly wounded, the Hun pilot turned his machine full speed for home. But our other plane, which had retained its altitude, hovered over him, headed him off from home, and shepherded him down onto the plain, where he was forced to land and was captured. On another occasion, we were puzzled to see a Hun plane, returning from our lines, pitch in enemy territory, and though unattacked, go up in smoke and flame. Subsequent reports furnished an explanation. The Hun pilot had descended without being very sure of his whereabouts. The Turks, mistaking him for a Britisher, opened fire upon him with a machine gun. Thereupon, believing himself to be in hostile territory, the pilot burnt his machine and surrendered to his own friends. Campaigning de luxe, the wild flowers did all that lay in their power to add to the luxury. The warm sun of February and March, following the drenching rain of the winter, produces in Palestine a profusion of beautiful flowers that is probably surpassed nowhere. The countryside was literally carpeted with choice flowers of sweet smell and varied colour. To mention but a few, there were red, white, and blue anemones, cyclamen, white, pink, and mauve, aromatic herbs, poppies and cornflowers, scarlet tulips, pink phlox, blue irises, velvety arum lilies, black and crimson, tall, stately hollyhocks. And the catalogue is scarce begun, truly a floral paradise. Early in March came rumours of a forward move. The nominal pretext was an improvement of our line. Other motives may possibly have been influencing the higher authorities, such as keeping the initiative in our hands, fostering an aggressive spirit, and feeling the strength of the enemy with a view to subsequent operations on a larger scale. Almost opposite Jaffa, the central range of Judean hills is cleft by a great gorge. Starting at a point on the edge of, and almost overlooking the Jordan Valley, it runs approximately due east and west, with many turns and even hairpin bends, until it debouches on the plain at Mejdel Yaba, thence forming a main tributary of the river Orja. In the days of the Maccabees, this gorge formed the frontier between the Jews and the Samaritans. This gorge is the Wadi Der Balat. The sides of this wadi are at all points steep, at some precipitous, presenting in places an almost sheer drop of several hundred feet. The bed of the wadi is from 100 to a couple of hundred yards wide and the surface level. Thus the Wadi Balat formed an admirable defensive line for the Turk. After it had passed into our hands, it provided us with an admirable line of communication. The Turk, at this time, held the line of the Wadi Balat with such advanced posts as could deny to our patrols all access to the wadi. Available information about the wadi was thus restricted to reports and maps, and was none too ample or reliable. The intermediate country consisted of approximately flat, merge, intersected with wadis, and dotted about with hills, villages, and other features of tactical importance. At this time of the year, it somewhat resembled the general appearance of Exmoor. For several days prior to the advance patrols were sent out into no man's land, that as much as possible might be ascertained about, and as many as possible be made familiar with, the terrain over which we had to operate. On the 12th March, the whole 75th Division, in cooperation with the divisions on its flanks, moved forward. The operations of this day were perhaps little more than minor operations, certainly not one of the decisive battles of the war, although their effect in drawing reinforcements to Palestine may have had far-reaching results in other zones such as Mesopotamia. Nevertheless, as they formed such a pretty field day, so like our manoeuvres at home, I venture upon a short description, in the hope that it may be of interest to those whose soldiering experience has been confined to the home front. There was no horrid barbed wire to contend with, nor gas. There were not even trenches, for the Turks' defence work here consisted only of stone walls, technically known as sangars. During the commencing stages, we were not even shelled. Shortly after dawn, our heavy artillery opened the ball by shelling the advanced posts of the enemy. At 7 o'clock, the whole line moved forward. Our first objective, a prominent knoll, was 4,000 yards away, and no previous opposition was expected. Having assumed the appropriate formation before crossing the crest, we moved forward in artillery formation, that is to say, in lines of platoons in file. For the non-military reader, it should be explained that this is the formation in which troops are considered least vulnerable against artillery or distant rifle and machine gun fire. Great care was taken to ensure that direction was maintained, an officer with compass being specially detailed for this purpose, and that touch was not lost with the units on either flank. A battery of field artillery had been detailed to support the advance of this battalion. The forward observation officer went forward with the infantry. The battery, less one section temporarily left behind, moved forward close behind us to a previously selected position from which the Deir Balut Ridge would be within easy range. A section of machine gunners moved forward close behind the leading companies. In a fold of the ground, some 1,400 yards short of the first objective, the infantry shook out into lines of skirmishers. They continued their advance and occupied the knoll, which was their first objective, without opposition. Meanwhile, after a concentrated bombardment on the left, the first and second of the enemy's forward posts were captured without serious opposition. It appeared probable that these had been occupied mainly for observation, and that his principal resistance was to be offered upon the Balut Ridge. After a short halt on the first objective, to conform to the timetable, we moved forward again in the same formation against our second objective, a ridge which seemed to overlook the Wadi Deir Balut. We still met with no opposition until we put our heads up over the ridge, when we were greeted with a torrent of bullets from machine guns posted on the opposite side of the wadi. This wadi, it will be remembered, was to us terra incognita. The first thing to be done, therefore, was to make a hurried reconnaissance and decide on the best method of getting down and across. It was found that the descent was almost a sheer precipice, and that we had not one but two wadis to cross. A smaller tributary wadi, scarcely marked on the map, forming in fact a rather serious obstacle. Carrying out such a reconnaissance upon a forward slope, under machine gun fire from across the wadi, was none too easy. It had been intended that the leading company, which took the ridge, should at once open covering fire across the wadi, whilst the company following should pass through them and cross the wadi under cover of their fire. However, the difficulty of taking up suitable positions for seeing the target and the extremity of the range, about 1,500 yards, made it inadvisable for the infantry to fire. But the machine gunners attached to us soon brought their machine guns into action, while our artillery took up a position on the ridge from which he could fire his guns to good effect. About this time, away to our left, developed the attack on Mejdal Yaba. This village occupies a commanding position overlooking the plain, and in crusading days was a fortress. That phase of the battle proved an artillery action pure and simple. The whole artillery of a division, with several heavies added, was concentrated on that luckless spot. It afforded a spectacle not soon to be forgotten. When the infantry arrived, they found the work all over. The Turks had all been killed by the bombardment or fled from the village, most of the latter having been cut off and killed by our machine guns. Before leaving, the Turks had taken the precaution of interviewing the headman of the village and cutting his throat. To return to our own corner of the picture, under cover of the fire of our own artillery and machine guns, the first company went forward. Slipping down that mountainside was a veritable case of running the gauntlet. But, once the bottom of the first wadi was reached, some cover was afforded for a breather. Almost in front of us, on the far ridge, lay the village of Deir Balut, on which the enemy evidently intended to base their strongest resistance. On our left, the infantry were making a good pace. On the right, they were held up, but seeing us going forward, they pushed forward too, so that pressure might be maintained all along the line. The enemy had organized his defenses and placed his machine guns with great skill. The slopes of the wadi were too steep for good shooting straight down the slope, so he had taken full advantage of the curves and hairpin bends of the wadi to place his machine guns in position, sweeping the spurs and giving each other mutual support. Our leading company lost no time in getting to work. They dumped their packs and set out at once to storm the ridge. Meanwhile, our infantry advancing on the left had taken some of the enemy machine guns in flank, forcing them to withdraw, which materially assisted the advance of the leading company. And so the leading company, closely followed by companies in support, established itself on the ridge. The fiercest of the fighting, however, was yet to come. A great burst of machine gun fire caused the leading platoon to take cover under one of the terraces. Hence, they were at once led forward again. The Turks now delivered a strong counterattack. Seeing this, the leading platoon dashed forward with their bayonets, led by the company cook, and the Turks were put to flight. The Lewis gunners caught them as they were getting away and effectually quenched all desire to renew the counterattack. Then the company pushed forward and, ignoring the village of Der Balut, with its machine guns, tried to get across the line of retreat from the village. Seeing this, the Turks evacuated Der Balut, and under cover of machine guns posted on the further ridges, those left alive made good their escape. That evening found us in undisputed possession of Der Balut Ridge, from beyond the village of Der Balut down to the plain at Majd el-Yaba.
This concludes today's reading of With the British Army in the Holy Land, by H.O. Locke. Join us also tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.